got to be very careful about who you partner with, because if they have not done lots of inner work to like identify who they are, do some shadow work, confront their demons, they're going to take it out on you, like when things don't go well.
Hi everyone, and hey Joy.
Hey Salimi.
Hey, we're always excited to bring you inspiring and brilliant guests on our podcast. We're powered by NewForum Foundation, focused on fostering the expansion of decentralized social applications, also known as Social 3.0, by forming an ecosystem and a community of visionaries, creators, and investors to spark conversations on the topics of crypto, the metaverse, NFT, and everything Web3. And on this episode, we have Gary Sheng. Enjoy. You know what?
What?
Gary quit his software engineering job at Google to co-found Civics Unplugged.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, you want to know why?
Yeah, tell me.
So he was feeling a deep responsibility to commit himself fully to building two systems and movements that empower people to become agents of building a more resilient and humanistic future.
Impressive. And did you know, like, Civics Unplugged is a nonpartisan 501c3 social enterprise devoted to empowering the leaders of Gen Z to become the civic innovators their communities need. So he was also on the Forbes 30 under 30 list, and he spoke at TEDx and South by Southwest about the future of democracy, the unprecedented change-making potential of Gen Z, and the power of revolutionary new technology. So I'm super excited for this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Let's get on it.
Hey Gary, we're super excited to have you on today's episode of NewForum.
Thanks so much, Joy and Salimi. It's super awesome to be here.
Yeah, so Gary, why don't we start off, like, how are you first off? And also my second question would be, you worked in Web 2 before. What made you change to Web 3?
So kind of like both in Web 2 and Web 3 at the same time, actually. But that speaks to a lot of what the current time that we're in. We're in a time of great transition from, you can call it number of names, status quo, old world, to like this new emerging world that is more positive sum, more collaborative, more energizing, more innovative, more humanistic. So part of how to answer like how I'm feeling is I'm feeling really excited because I think, you know, not that we're happy that there was a pandemic, but the pandemic and now this war or this invasion of Russia into Ukraine has really awakened people to the importance of leadership, civic innovation, global cooperation, a lot of things that we at Civics Unplugged have been talking about for a while, and people in general have been talking about for a while. But I think like leaders across sectors are really taking these things seriously more than ever. So
Right.
just super excited about this, super excited about all the different people that are really excited to collaborate with young people and just to like create useful things for humanity.
Interesting. So you mentioned a bit about Civics Unplugged, and I would like it if you could speak on it a bit more, like expound on what you do exactly and why education for young people is particularly important to you.
So Civics Unplugged is this kind of beautiful thing that came from a lot of discussion in 2019 about what America initially we were just focused on America, the United States, what America needed, and we were very disappointed by the state of our leadership, not just our political leadership, but sort of civic leadership across sectors. We didn't feel like there was kind of educational infrastructure to develop the kind of leaders, the kind of innovators that are able to kind of grapple with the extraordinary changes and complexities of today. Like the world is complexifying at an exponential rate. It's changing at an exponential rate. And thus, like leaders have a much greater responsibility to be like the standards by which we evaluate and select leaders is much higher now. And so, yes, America needs to do a lot better job of helping young people learn, like in America we call like the 3 branches of government and like basic like foundational knowledge about how the government works and how to interact with it. But there's so much more now, right? You have to understand all sorts of technologies, like how to be digitally organized, how to like consume media in a way that's more helpful than distracting, how to collaborate with people digitally and in person, how to know how to pick like a specialty area. Like, are you going to focus on climate stuff, or are you going to focus on criminal justice stuff? There's very little support to help people of any age, but certainly high schoolers, to find their U-shaped holes in society, and to be really useful in society. So we have a 3-month Civic Innovators Fellowship that is kind of like the core of everything that we do. It brings, hundreds of kids into our long-term community every year. And then beyond that, we have some specialized programming as it relates to Web3 and also climate innovation that we're actively building out.
Interesting. So I was thinking, I guess you probably answered it in the last part, but I was like curious to know, like, is Civics Unplugged like specifically tailored to the United States, or like maybe some states in the United States? Or is it like, now that we have Web3 is more global. So I was curious to know, how is this educational, I guess, tool, or this kind of opportunity extended to like more of a diverse, I guess, community?
So we're almost wrapping up our 4th program, and all the last 3 programs have all included international kids. And we have alumni. By the end of this program, we're going to have alumni in 70 plus countries. And the origin of it is that after the first program, we had international kids from all around the world kind of knocking on a virtual door, saying that they heard about the kind of training that we were giving American kids, and they're like, this kind of training is badly needed in our country, and we want it. We want to take it, and because it's not accessible locally. And so the fact that we have a digital first educational model was very exciting to these sort of really proactive kids. And some of these proactive kids, they're like from India, Germany, Switzerland, Singapore, the list goes on. And so it's been really, really cool to see the sort of international community come together.
That's amazing. Looks like you guys are making like a really great impact, and I'm happy with the answer, I'd say.
I'm wondering, Gary, like, what kind of skills do you think does Gen Z and the young people need to develop, and like, what do you see as kind of like where there is like a gap, an education gap, or what can we do about that as well? I mean, just from my experience, I'm quickly going to give an example. For me, I'm still in college and I'm studying online, and but sometimes I feel like my lectures and the things that I'm learning, they're very like book smart, but they're not very like hands-on, like coding or 3D design or things that we learn now in Web3. So I'm thinking for myself and the people, there's like this gap of like book knowledge and then really things that you need on a day-to-day basis, and also accessibility as well, where there's a lot of programs like boot camps, for example, coding boot camps that are very expensive. And I'm thinking, how can we use Web3 to really just better our education?
Yeah, so speaking of the relevance of education, Web3 aside, there's so much that people need to learn, whether they consider themselves leaders or not. I think there's people that want to feel productive and useful in society. There's all sorts of like deep personal development stuff that they're not taught in schools. Learning how to learn, which is like, it's kind of cliche, but learning how to like make sense of the flood of information happening all the time, right? Like there's information just in the periphery of your room, right? And like on the city streets and everything. And then there's like social media, and then there's like mainstream media, then like there's information in your organizations that like it's kind of overwhelming. How do you make sense of that? Sense making is going to be like a real discipline or like a skill set that has historically not been taken seriously. Like I think school has treated students as like memorization machines, where like life is just full of ambiguity, right? Like even if you just think about like a single friend of yours, or maybe especially like a potential romantic partner, there's so much ambiguity in the communication of just like a single person, right? So what happens when you're trying to make sense of what's happening in a community? Dream DAO and like Civics Unplugged more broadly is like this big community where lots of people have different ideas of what it should be. and there lots of people have complaints. A lot of people love it. How do you make sense of that? It's not obvious how to do that if the way that your brain has developed is just through like multiple choice tests where you're like, oh, it's like very simple, right? It's like this or this. Like it's often like everything at the same time, and you won't even know which direction to go or feel confident at all if you have not done like the personal development work to be like, what kind of world do I want to see built? Because everything is sort of downstream from that. As in like, how do you know what organization you want to build and like what it should achieve if you don't have a vision for what better looks like? Because no one's handing that down to you unless you're going to kind of blindly take in like whatever the UN says or what someone else's vision of what better looks like. But it's not obvious what better is. Like if I were to, I'm not going to put anyone on the spot here, but if I were to ask you, one of you, like what should the world look like in 2040 in detail, like, are you prepared to answer that? I don't know if I am. I think Web3 is going to be a lot more people starting new things than transitioning old things to Web3.
Speaking of new things, you touched a bit on Dream DAO, and I want to know, what do you think is the positive, like why do you want to build a DAO? Like what's the positive side of a DAO different to like a corporation, and what is Dream DAO for you about?
There's all kinds of DAOs, and so you can look at two DAOs that almost look opposite and be like, how are they both DAOs? But I think my definition is something like you have a spirit of, it's not even so much for me decentralization as it is more about creating effective, accountable, democratic structures that get stuff done, that a community should get done. But not everything should be about a community, honestly. Like I'm not like a community maximalist, even though I really appreciate community. And like I think Amazon would not be able to be built as a community, or like Google or whatever. Like there was a lot of community spirit early on. It was very innovative, but like a lot of businesses need to have that sort of hierarchical, clear structure where people can focus on building a thing that their leaders told them to build, basically. Like it's kind of may seem like crazy for someone like me to be saying this, but I truly do not think everything should be structured like a DAO. I think DAOs are actually, it's like the worst structure if you're trying to build like most software company should just be like a few people that are like architecting it and like taking a lot of user feedback, but like it's not like there's like 100 cooks in the kitchen, right? There's like a couple people that are like directing the vision. But for like social movements, DAO technology, DAO spirit, DAO best practices are going to be very helpful, right? So this is why I am helping advise on a working group in America on Web3 and political organizing, because there's a lot of interesting tooling and philosophy that's emerging from Web3 that's very relevant to creating better political campaigns that are more empowering for more people, create less burnout, better compensation structures, you know what I mean? And a lot of that still needs to be figured out, but I think like communities and movements are the main sort of things that DAO structures, DAO tooling could supercharge if done right. But I think right now it's so early that most people will create more issues trying to start DAOs or implement DAO tooling than if they didn't. But I say this as someone that's like very, very bullish on DAOs and the future movements. I think right now, the joke I like to have is that you have to be like a philosopher, king or queen, extreme workaholic, almost like a spiritual guru, and a tech wizard to successfully make sure that your DAO does not die immediately. I'm not even going to say that I know how to create a DAO that survives a long time, because we're so early. I feel like almost no DAOs can say that they're successful because it's so early. Because I think the true test of DAOs is like 2 years from now. Like, are the DAOs that were started 2 years ago still around? Does that make sense? Like for Dream DAO, we've only been around for like 3 months in terms of our operations. And so talk to me in like 9 months at least, if we're still around. And I almost feel like me being this honest is like, will allow us to survive, because it is hard and I think a lot of our community members need to understand this as well, that there's often no good solutions for hard human problems that make everyone happy. You know what I mean? How can you make like 50 people happy that all are very different people? And so like, it's kind of like, it's like, well, think about democracy, right? Think about American democracy, for example, which is so divisive and like, we're barely surviving. We're barely surviving. So it should not surprise people that smaller democracies are also kind of chaotic and have a lot to figure out. So I am very optimistic about the long-term potential of this stuff and very clear-eyed that we have a long, long way to go.
Yeah, I think there comes a great responsibility with the leaders and the builders. And, you know, a couple of years ago, I feel like there was this trend of being an entrepreneur or trend of being, you know, a founder. And it's like, then people start things and they realize how difficult it actually is to implement these things. And I think we're at that stage as well, you know, where people are trying things, we're trying to figure this out and using all these tools, but in the end, like nobody has built this thing before or nobody has used the tools before. So it's a rough patch, but yeah, like you said, we're gonna talk to you in 2 years and see what we've learned. And yeah, I think that's exciting.
Maybe in like some 8 months, I think. we can check in to see. But I think like we're definitely appreciate your transparency. And you know, sometimes we have, you know, well, this thing happening in Web3 is a lot of people go on gashing about like, you know, all these like utopia like concept of how this is going to be and that's going to be. So I think it's really nice that, you know, we can also bring the other side of things, because these are different perspectives, and that's kind of how people are going to start thinking. Somebody's going to watch this episode and hear what you said, and it's going to switch on a light bulb, and they're going to maybe do something differently, or they will be the one to create that tool that solves the problem, right? Because wherever there are like more than even 3 human beings, you know, interacting, there's always a challenge. And so you spoke a bit on this idea of like hierarchy, right? And especially when it comes to like community, like I know that like in the old times everything was community based. Like my part of my family comes from Ghana, and most things are still, we've adopted democracy. However, when you go to those villages, there's still this community, right? And people function that way, and people actually prefers that. But even though it's community oriented, there's still somebody who kind of like a leader,
yeah,
you know, to tell or to call the shots, to direct the people within the community. But I think the difference is that this person is chosen by the people and is kind of like trusted in a sense. And I think maybe that might be the little difference. But yeah, I mean, we had one guest who touched a bit on the fact that even within a DAO, there are these roles. There are people that low-key play this kind of role, not in a very corporate way, but they are kind of like directing the team or the group or the members of the community. I mean, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you for being so thoughtful on that. The word that myself and a lot of people in my role are kind of calling is DAO steward. And everyone should be a steward, if you remember. Everyone should be a good representative, because if you're going to put the DAO on your Twitter bio or whatever, you better like represent the values and all that. The way I like to talk about it is like, I think people are so traumatized by this like old, they think of their worst boss and they're like, oh, I would never want a single boss of this DAO, right? And like what people don't get, like especially I'm dealing with this, and hey, if you're listening to this and you know I'm calling you out, it's like there's people in the DAO that do not understand the importance of leadership and accountability and having single people. The joke is that you want single neck to choke if the DAO does not succeed, right? So it's not like the DAO steward is like, oh, I'm the king and like you should listen to everything I say. And it's like one person that deals with emergencies and everything that doesn't fit into anyone else's job description and is accountable for everyone else being accountable. And so it's a position of responsibility and less so power. It is, and to your point, it's like, if you don't like the reason why they are chosen, or why they created it, why they were able to create the DAO in the first place, is because they had trust from the community, right? And so often, like a new person will come in, or someone that doesn't understand community building or leadership. It's like, oh, I feel like I could do that job easily. And like, I think that's kind of like often critiques of like presidents of like countries is often like justified, but it's like, you often don't know what goes into being a president. You can point out the worst thing that they've done, or like they misspoke that one time, or you thought they were rude that one time, or they made a bad joke. It's like, okay, what about everything else that they've done to be the glue, and also fundraise, and also spend hours and hours building partnerships, or sourcing them, getting interest in the first place. So currently dealing with a lot of just like almost like human organization systems 101, right? Like I find myself having to explain like very in some ways very basic things, but what you wouldn't understand unless you were in the position of leadership and had some kind of empathy with what people like me are going through. I think it's a very good thing that people's expectations of what people with any sort of power, like the grown, right? Like that people have higher expectations of who should have power. And I think it needs to be more of a common recognition that there needs to just be one or two people who you can point to, like, okay, the DAO did not succeed this season, you're to blame. Right? And if you're not ready to take on the responsibility, you should not be the steward. If you're someone that is blaming other people for why the DAO did not get stuff done, right, you should not be in that position, because it's your responsibility to inspire them, to train them, to select and encourage the right kind of people to take up other leadership positions in the DAO.
Yeah, this is really, I'm really glad we're like discussing this, because these are like real issues. And most of the time, again, we've had conversations where we've had guests speak about DAOs, and it's just all been like all this excitement, which is great because it is exciting, it is fun, and you get to have this community that supports you, and you support each other and you bounce off of each other. But I think that there's like this other side of things. I'm glad we're touching on it, but I definitely believe that like have good leadership is very important. And I think you used the word empathy, and I think that a good leader should be able to empathize with members of the team, with members of the community and whatnot, and find a way to work together in a very like harmonious way. And it's not always easy, but I can talk about, at least in our team and our CEO and how he works. Like he's an amazing leader because there's no micromanaging, there's no controlling. We are all like working together. We all bring our ideas, but then he's directing the team, but in a way, in such a seamless way that nobody feels control.
Yeah, good energy flows, right?
Exactly.
Like very, very natural.
Exactly.
Are you all remote or no?
Yeah, we're all remote. So
cool.
it's
That's impressive, because it's harder to do that when you're remote.
Exactly. And he does it very, very well. And so I think that definitely having some direction in a group with people, even if all the values are aligned, I think it's definitely valid. But this is great. And I know that, most people, I would say, like, especially when it comes to Web3, Gen Z is like, I don't know, the most, I guess, everybody talks about Gen Z when it comes to Web3. So I'm just wondering, like, what you think about Gen Z's potential with Web3 to cause like a larger societal impact.
I think if Gen Z learns to not just be contrarian, and also like recognize like where there was virtue in other models or existing models, and like take what works, and also be willing to experiment with new technologies and potentially new models, but more importantly, actually to look back at what has worked in history, right? Communities, co-ops, these are not new things. Often technology is just enabling those ideals to be more reliably realized. So Gen Z has like this sort of change-making spirits and like anti-status quo spirits. I think that's a really good foundation. They need to be intensely curious about movements in the past, like organizational structures of the past. Learn from like boomers, like people that organized in the 1960s. Like they need to learn how to be humble, right? And easier to work with. And I'm calling out some people here, but like, you know, sometimes the problem is not other people, it is yourself, right? And you can get into this. I've been there. I've been in this like very activist mindset where everything else besides me is the problem, right? And again, the idealism and the desire to make change is very, very good. I think there's wisdom from history, right, that is applicable at any time in history, probably, like Stoicism, like just deep humility from Socrates, like all these things they cannot forget. And so I find myself like often at like, in the same way that I was talking about DAOs, like I'm both intensely optimistic in a conditional sense, but also very, very practical. And because I have a lot of lived experience with both the brilliance and naivete of Gen Z and Web3 builders. And I think like the people will actually push society forward are people that are like very well read, very humble, love working with people that have divergent viewpoints and diverse skills, are both very empathetic, but also thick-skinned. And a lot of these things I'm just like, I've thought a bit about in the past, but it's like, it's crystallizing to me because the world is, let's talk about the thick-skinned part, right? You, and the empathetic part, you need to give people that you want to work with plenty of benefit of the doubt, right? Because they may have ate the wrong food today, right? Or, you know, going through whatever problem, but you need to be so proud of being resilient and not triggered by random things that people say, because they're just having a bad day, or they just have a different communication style than you. Because you can't both want diversity of thought and perspective and life experience and personality and be triggered by people that are not exactly like you. So all this is top of mind, as you can see, as I'm just trying to be real. I just want to be helpful to listeners, right?
We love it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to be helpful because I want everyone else to succeed and not fail. And it's very hard if you do not set the appropriate expectation of what it takes to lead today and what you'll have to deal with and what kind of leaders you want to help cultivate. Like what kind of people do you want to empower to work with you and to, you know, who do you want to hire or partner with? You got to be very careful about who you partner with, because if they have not done lots of inner work to like identify who they are, do some shadow work, confront their demons, they're going to take it out on you, like when things don't go well.
I have one, like, this is so interesting because I read a lot of like, you know, self-growth and these type of books, you know, and I was just, I had like this habit or pattern of really being a lot on social media. And I felt like my brain, I wanted more information. I wanted to know what's out there and I didn't want to miss out. But also I felt like my brain was really unfocused, you know? And I started like doing things differently. Like I started putting my phone away, and now I'm starting to read like more in the morning and just start off clean, like go to the gym, all these things. And I'm wondering, what do you think, like, is there going to be like a disadvantage for Gen Zers because of the flood of information? And also, how do you filter, you know, it's really hard. Like, I think there was this podcast where they said, what does a billionaire need to do? And the most important thing is like focus, because if you have like a call and interrupting you all the time, like these things, they take a lot of your energy and a lot of your brain power, instead of if you just focus on a thing and you're like, your mind is there, you know what I mean? So like these things I think are so interesting just to me too, because I don't want to be there like scrolling and just consuming everything, you know? So
right. So man, there's so much to say. There's no leadership without deep personal development today. I don't think there was ever leadership, but like I just think that we're now very aware that leaders have a deep responsibility to be hyper self-aware and emotionally developed and willing to grow. Like on the note of focus, I involve myself in a lot of different things, but I cut out everything I don't think is important. So, or I think is harmful for my ability to achieve what I need to achieve. So I cut out alcohol. I haven't drank for 2.5 years. I barely drink caffeine just so I have level energy. Social media for me is a tool. I probably sometimes use it too much, but I'm actually pretty like deliberate about it. Like I use it to like build my brand and to educate people, to connect with partners, all these things. I think if you're not seeing like new donors or investors or new partners come from your social media activity, you're just wasting your time. I think you should ask yourself that question, like, oh, I'm learning. It's like you're probably not learning in the best way if you're just scrolling social media. I think podcasts, books are incredibly useful for diving deep into a topic. By the way, if you want to dive deep into a topic, I would subscribe to like 2 or 3 of the top podcasts on a particular topic. Binge, and then you'll quickly like understand the vocabulary and like what is most important to people in a particular industry. I don't date right now, even though it's like it'll be very fun this summer. Like people will be very excited to date and have fun and party, but this is just a choice that I've made because I'm still like relatively young and I have time to figure out that stuff later. And this is truly like a time, and I'm not saying do whatever. It's like, this is just my choice. The rationale is like, you know, you go on it, there's a lot of rationales, but like, number one, this is me being useful to your audience. If you start liking someone, you think about them all the time. And then you can count the in-person time with them. Let's say you meet them once or twice a week. That's like 10, 15 hours of your time, depending on what you're doing with them. And what could you do in those 10, 15 hours? And also all the time that you're distracted, you're texting them. Like, so you could be reading like 5 books. And I'm not, again, sounds like robotic almost, but there's times in your life where you just have to say no to certain things. And it doesn't have to be dating, you can choose to do that, but what else are you saying no to? Because if you go out and get really drunk with friends and you wake up really hungover, it's almost incalculable what that does to your ability to achieve your goals. And do you want to be working with, I don't know, like, do you want to be working with a leader that has a drinking problem or a drug problem? I don't know. I don't think so. I also cut out meat because I couldn't really justify it with the climate change and my health as well. Cut out Diet Coke recently. I was drinking too much Diet Coke. I think this all just adds up to being able to have the energy and like clarity of mind to deal with like the million like interpersonal issues that come up from just like the chaos. It's like part of why there's so many interpersonal issues I think that come up today. Like, and I coach a lot of my friends on this, and like I got a really nice text today from like, so it's like I met with my partner and like, you know, we had a breakthrough. Thank you so much for coaching me through that, blah blah blah. And you almost can't blame people for being like bad to their teammates and stuff, because like there's so much going on in the world and probably so much happening with your family, and it's probably so much like in your internal life, and it's very easy for people. The easiest thing for people to do is to not analyze the whole situation of their lives, and kind of like, you shouldn't even blame that whole situation. It's just like the situation is not ideal, and it's my responsibility to improve the situation, not blame it on my employer, right? And also, if you want a more democratic workplace, and there was never any, and the employer has told you that they're happy with you taking more responsibility if you want, it's like you have a problem and you're not dealing with it, it's your problem. If you've been told that you have the power to change it, actually have the power, and you're not doing it, and you're just complaining in your mind, or complaining to your friends like, oh, I hate, all my problems are because of this. You have some internal work to do. I just find myself like thinking about like how relevant our work is and why we are focusing on high schoolers, because it's a lot harder to convince people that are in their mid-20s or something, or mid-30s, that they need to do a lot of development. older people just have to be inspired, or like something really bad in their lives have to happen usually for them to really want to do some personal development. I do got to run, but
Yeah.
let's touch base over email.
Also, could you, before you run, could you tell our community members and our listeners where they can find you before you run?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing is you can find me on LinkedIn, Gary Sheng, and then also on Twitter, Gary Sheng, GarySheng. Happy to connect and talk. Also, like, let me know if I can be helpful in the future as well. I gotta run, but so nice catching up. Let's touch base.
Thank you, Gary. And thank you to everyone who tuned in with us today. If you also want to get more involved within our community, make sure to follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. We are NewForum_NCO and also NewCoin. And we have a private Telegram group, as well as all the links we're going to leave in the bio. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next episode of NewForum. Thank you, Salimi. Thank you, Gary, and see you in the next one.